super simple video today. Last week we took out the last wall in this apartment, which left me with a completely open space, but also just completely white wall in the end, which looks kind of boring. And ever since moving in, I've wanted to recreate the look of my prior studio with the concrete wall panels. At the time, I got a ton of comments in the comment section asking me about the concrete look in my videos. I couldn't really make a video about it because it was fake. It was made out of EPS and it was pretty poorly done, so there wasn't really any content there. This time around, I wanted this place to look decent even when I'm not filming. I actually experimented quite a lot with all kinds of fake concrete and all kinds of concrete looking paint. None of it really worked and none of it really gave me the effect that I was looking for. Eventually I just came to the conclusion that if you want a concrete look, maybe you should just use real concrete. And that brings us to the melamine sheets over here. These are 60 by 120 centimeters, and I pre-cut the strips at the side over there so that we can actually see if everything is going to be level. I'd never actually worked with concrete before, but I was really curious to see what it would be like and what the material properties are. Maybe we could use it for a different project. I thought in the worst case scenario, if this doesn't really work out, then I'll just have a bunch of new tools that I could use for different projects. Now, because the curing time on concrete is really quite long, I built 2 of these molds, and then we could also experiment with different types of release agents and see what the effects of it are essentially. I did some experiments before actually filming the setup over here just to check out if the project was feasible or not. And the first one, I actually did it with self-leveling concrete, which worked out really nicely, and to this day that is one of the strongest panels I've ever produced. And as you can see over here, I also did some cutting in that panel just to check out if I could actually, form these to size and make them go around outlets and that kind of stuff, which is totally doable. But for the rest of this project, I wanted to use the cheapest concrete I could find. So the concrete that you buy in the hardware store for €4, and self-leveling concrete is a bit more on the pricey side. Now, to make these panels last as long as possible, I wanted to put some shrinkage reinforcements in there. So these are little particles that you mix in the concrete, and that just prevents cracks from forming. So that's nice for keeping these panels looking good long term. So you'll see me mixing stuff in 3 buckets, and that's mainly because I want to keep the panel thickness consistent. Putting the concrete in 3 different buckets allows me to check that relatively reliably. As I mentioned before in the intro, I'm not really familiar with concrete, so I wasn't really sure how to mix the stuff properly. Didn't know how much water it needed. Eventually I did land on a form of mix that I quite enjoyed, which was by making 1 wet mix and 1 a little bit drier, and then mixing those 2 together. So the outer edges are the wetter mix, and that also leaves it a little bit more contrast on the edges. So even though the first batch went really quite well, I wasn't able to consistently demold these successfully. So sometimes it would break into little pieces when I tried to get them off the melamine sheets. And so eventually I added some WD-40. This will act as a mold release agent, but I would recommend adding some proper mold release agent if you want super clean panels. Now I'm going for that industrial look, so having these not be completely clean isn't an issue for me. Something else I noticed is how long it actually took to put these in the mold and how long it took to spread everything out into the corners. So eventually I went on Amazon and bought myself a concrete vibrator. If you're doing a project like this yourself, it makes a lot of sense to get a device like this because it speeds up the workflow quite a lot. You just vibrate the panel and everything flows into its place. In terms of demolding the panels, I've found that after 1 or 2 days you can successfully demold them, but then they're not actually strong enough to put on the wall yet. So what I did is I demolded a bunch of batches and then just left them somewhere to dry a little bit longer, but then at least we can reuse the molds to create even more panels. And this was one of the first successful panels. You can see that there's a lot of contrast in this one. That's just because it hasn't dried out completely. And once the panel has dried out, it doesn't really retain that contrast at all. It just turns into a grey sheet, which is a little bit sad. I tried to get that contrast back by sanding it or putting oil over it and that kind of stuff, but none of it really landed me the effect that I wanted. Eventually though, after putting a couple of these panels up against the wall, I assessed that it was, good enough for my use cases. The next thing I was a little bit worried about is how do you actually mount these against the wall. Ideally, I'd like to put screws in them and have little washers attached so I could simply bolt these to the wall. I wasn't entirely sure if I'd start drilling in this thing if the corners would just snap off. So I 3D printed myself a little guide here and used a normal bit with a normal drill. I wouldn't use a hammer drill for this because then it would just break everything into pieces. I was able to drill through these quite easily, also by twisting and turning the drill quite a lot. The drill bit is sacrificial at this point. It will degrade after a certain amount of panels, but I haven't actually had a single panel fail because of this process. After that, I used the panel as a guide to drill some holes into the wall. Now, because my apartment has hollow walls over here, I'm using these anchor bolts of sorts, so these will just open up inside of the wall and create a relatively strong mount. Now, realistically, all of the weight will just be on the ground because it's mainly holding the panel in place. It's not actually holding the entire weight of the panel. And after that, I added some washers to the nuts themselves. I actually really like the look of this as well. And I saw on the panels on Pinterest that often they have little indents in the concrete panels over there. I'm not entirely sure if that's for mounting or if that's just a visual aspect of it, but I wanted to recreate that somewhat in my own way. You have to be a little bit careful that you don't put too much pressure on these bolts over here because they will snap the panel in half. And these panels aren't strong in any way. They're not structural whatsoever, right? If you hold them in the wrong way, they'll just snap in half as well. I was quite concerned that I wouldn't be able to cut these size. Eventually, I used a sacrificial sheet of MDF underneath the panel when I was cutting these. So I still have all my fingers, but that was a little bit sketchy. It took me a couple of weeks to complete the project because I only had 2 molds, and it takes quite a while to actually demold them, put all of the holes in there, and then mount them onto the wall. When it's all finished though, when it's all on there and it's put together, it looks really decent on camera. I quite enjoy it. As I was walking down the aisle in the hardware store to get myself some more concrete, I noticed that there were concrete wall panels on sale for 20 euros. I didn't see these during the research process, so I must have missed them or they must have come out recently. I don't imagine that's the case, but these could also work really nicely. They are polished. They look a little bit cleaner than the ones I have behind me. If you want to see me compare the two, then definitely let me know. I'll make a short form video about it as I need some concrete wall panels in the front room as well. But in the end, I did it myself. It's cheaper and I got myself a new tool. So that's the benefit of DIYing stuff. You learn a bunch of stuff, get some new tools, and eventually it trickles down to other projects as well. I was curious about what the panel cost eventually was. And so I did some rough calculations. I paid about 30 euros for the melamine molds, and they're still somewhat usable. I could use them for a different project. Then I made 2 panels per bag of concrete. The bag of concrete is about 4 euros. And then we have the crimpage stuff that I mixed in with it. I'm not entirely sure if that was necessary or not, but it came down to a cost of 3.50 per panel. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of the look of the panels, and if you like it overall, or if you have any improvements on my concrete mixing skills or something like that. Anyway, hope you have a good day.